On this episode of Spirit Talk.
One of the clients, we got talking to it, and then obviously had this conversation with Succubus, and it was just explaining how, again, they're just doing what they're kind of programmed to do. So, a dog is a dog and it barks, and a succubus energetically just wants to connect to a male, basically, and then obviously through some type of sexual act take their life, because they were sort of explaining that, when a human takes its life or its life ends, there's a huge adrenaline explosion, effectively, and that's the energy they want to kind of capture, and that's what they can then trade on this kind of universal energetic market.
Hi, I'm Chris Fleming, the creator of Spirit Talk. You're listening to the podcast where I'll be bringing you the greatest thinkers, researchers, and contributors from around the world to discuss what we know in the field of the paranormal, life after death, and the pursuit of higher consciousness. Hey, this is Chris Fleming. Welcome back to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. I have with me Andrew Porter, a psychic surgeon who has been working with his guide Chen since January 2008, performing psychic surgery workshops, talks, and demonstrations, working with clients from all over the world. Now, Andrew has set up the UK's first psychic surgery organization called UUPS, Unity of UK Psychic Surgeons, and has also written a channeled book answering many spiritual questions with guidance from his guide Chen. This book, Chen's Spiritual and Psychic Teachings by Andrew Porter, Psychic Surgeon, answers many questions people on a spiritual path often ask. So this is what I find fascinating about Andrew's work, is right now he's currently focusing on the area of auditory voice hallucinations, people that are hearing voices. Hearing voices is a huge problem across the world, and one that has affected many families and individuals. Now, Andrew has worked alongside a Dr. Terence Palmer, who is arguably the most foremost authority in the United Kingdom on this subject of people hearing voices, as well as dealing with attachments. These people suffer from intrusive thoughts, anxiety, and depression, and is a growing problem in every country across the globe, especially in the younger generation. Now, it affects every country and has been very detrimental, these effects adding to or causing, in some cases, mental health. And what we're going to see is we've seen a lot of people that have had mental health issues also tend to hear voices. So we're going to talk about that. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Yeah, hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
No, you're welcome. Now, I see you've worked alongside a Dr. Terence Palmer. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so basically, Terence contacted me probably 10 to 15 years ago now, I guess, really, because he was looking for someone in the UK that was, which was psychic, basically, because he was specialising in the area of sort of intrusive voice hallucinations and schizophrenia, that kind of thing. And he wanted to find a psychic, basically, that could talk to spirit or other psychic or deceased entities, and basically do some research from that perspective. So I basically hooked up with him with an offer just to kind of work with him in a kind of research capacity, for no cost, etc. Because obviously it's something I was interested in at the same time as well. And my guide Chen was kind of pushing me in that direction. So Terence's kind of bio spoke for itself at the time, really.
Right.
And the two of us sort of teamed up, and then we became good friends, and obviously spent a long time working together now.
Now, what I find fascinating is about the work that you guys did is you worked with clientele, individuals that are suffering from certain mental health issues. And what is it that you guys found?
So in a nutshell, what we kind of realised and discovered, Terence was kind of well in front of me from that perspective, really, and he's obviously written a few books on the subject, the science of spirit possession. So in his book, The Science of Spirit Possession, he actually talks about the science and the concept of mental illness being caused by primarily entities or discarnate spirit, really. So other spiritual beings, if you like, that have attached themselves to a living human, and when they're attached, they're able then to influence that person's behaviour, thought process with intrusive thoughts, intrusive compulsions, so addictions, all those sorts of things come out basically when you have an attachment. So Terence, I kind of picked this up a long time before we spoke, really, and he's obviously written this book about it. And then the idea was that we wanted to try and get to 1,000 cases, basically, together of real people,
Wow.
which was, at the time we started, it was one of those numbers that you come up with and think, right, if we can get to like 1,000 cases, it would be really good from a kind of scientific and medical perspective, because then Terence could write papers and go into the medical fraternity and talk about the concept that we've actually done like a huge amount of research. And of course, when we started, we had no idea really where that was going to take us, because again, it was a kind of research project to a certain degree, and we didn't know where the conclusion of that would be. But I mean, the conclusion was pretty conclusive, that probably 80 to 90% of people that had mental health problems had attachments of one degree or another. And of course, that then plays in with all sorts of other traumas that they've been through in their life. So again, many of those people have been through some type of abuse, whether it was sort of physical, sexual, and obviously PTSD comes in from other types of experiences that people have had as well. So it kind of led us down quite a few different paths at the same time, really.
Yeah. And so in what you're saying is individuals, and my listeners know I've talked about this in the past, experiences I've had, people I know, cases I've done. But what you're saying in summary is that with these people that have these certain mental illnesses and certain conditions, that there tends to be a spirit or entity behind it. What have you found over the years in your work? I mean, let's talk about this. How have you worked with Dr. Terence Palmer in dealing with this? And since he's no longer with us, right? He has passed away recently.
He did. He actually passed away on New Year's Eve last year with COVID. So
yeah, that's what I heard. That's a shame.
Bad timing, really.
Yeah, it's a shame to hear that. But you're obviously carrying the torch at this point in your life. So tell us, what was the type of things that you guys did and how you worked in confronting or recognizing these spirits in people?
So the way that we would work together, basically, for the clients that we kind of jointly worked on, obviously I still do the same thing on my own, but the way that I worked with Terry was basically we'd connect generally on Skype or on Zoom or something. He'd already have spoken to the client, and he'd normally do like a kind of video call with them just to find out, the problem that they've got, some sort of like executive summary of their life and where they are now and how they probably came to have those types of mental health problems. So, he was interested to see whether it was a mental health problem they'd had from being very young or whether it happened later in life, and whether some type of trauma had actually been the kind of instigating fact for that kind of, for the intrusive voices, that kind of thing. Right. So he would do that as a kind of prerequisite, really. And then the way we worked is he wouldn't tell me anything about the person at all. So he'd refer to a case number.
Oh, okay.
So I never had any information at all. So as a psychic, I'd connect to Chen, my guide, and we'd have a quick chat and sync up. So I'd obviously verify I was talking to him in the way that I normally do. And then Terry would say, okay, we've got case number, say 123. It's a male from North Carolina, and that would be it, really.
Right.
And he'd then expect my guide Chen to be able to connect to that person's energy sync, because obviously we've all got our own individual vibrations, right. So we didn't really need a name per se. The fact that Terry had the case number and the person, he knew the person as a client, then Chen was able to connect to that energy stream of that person. And then we'd basically go through, over the years, we kind of developed a technique to do it, but initially I would just look at the etheric field of the client to see what I could see. So I would generally start to see images in my mind of pretty negative things generally. Right. So if it was negative entities, we ended up kind of scoping them in 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3, effectively. So level 1 entity would just be a kind of gargoyle-y type thing that you'd expect to see on the top of a church. So,
okay, wait, hang on 1 second. So like gargoyle type thing, and my listeners know, I think they're putting it together. Are you talking about like an impish type creature?
Yeah, basically that type of thing.
Yep.
So the thing that you can't see on churches, so they would be always attached generally to a client that was hearing voices as a kind of starting point. And then sometimes we would connect to a more intelligent entity, which we would sort of regard as like a level 2, which again, we would kind of see that as a kind of demonic type creature, if you like. But they would generally be easy to talk to. So I could easily talk to them psychically and we'd have a conversation like you and I are now. So there was no kind of negativity and there was no threat level whatsoever. And generally, my guide Chen would ask them to disconnect from the client. And 9 times out of 10, they would actually do that when asked, which kind of goes against what you would think, really. You'd imagine that if you've got some sort of demonic entity, they would be pretty negative and very difficult. But, when you're actually working with them in the way that we worked, where there was quite a lot of respect either way. And obviously my guide, Chen, has a team behind him. So these entities would actually see the team as well as Chen. And I guess they kind of knew that, their time was up, really. And they would then 9 times out of 10, elect to disconnect from the client. And we'd obviously then work through the rest of the kind of technique. So we look at, things like, does the client have stagnant energy in their etheric field? Have they got other intrusive cording to other people? So as you go through life, obviously we create energetic cords, especially with people that we have emotional relationships with and sexual relationships. So that those cordings are in place. And of course, sometimes they're negative. And obviously they stay connected between, say, you and like an ex-wife or ex-husband. So until those cords get removed, the emotional stream of energy is still moving backwards and forwards, which is what we find, some people find it difficult to forget about, or they have dreams of ex-partners or people that have been in their life negatively. So we'd clear the cords that were connected, and then we just work through different levels of vibration, basically, and just remove all of that stagnant negativity. And again, we started to find lots of cursing as well, which didn't really come up at the start.
What did you say, cursing, like swearing?
Well, cursing as in black magic and voodoo. That sort of thing.
Okay, okay.
So then I would actually see in my mind's eye, Chen would show me a picture of a person, and I'd see a stream of negative energy coming in from on my perception of the right. And therefore I would know that was a curse or voodoo or some type of occult practice, basically. And then we would basically visualize disconnecting that. Chen would tell me that it's been disconnected and reflected. But that was the other thing that we kind of decided to do. We don't engage negatively, so we don't kind of fight anything at all. It's a much kind of less stressful thing to do. Again, when we first started, we kind of did battle with negativity in that way, and it didn't work out that well for me, really.
Don't you think, though, that is like they want you to get angry? They want you to get mad and lose control?
Exactly it, Chris. Basically, that is the whole thing, because I got to realise over the last sort of 24 years, everything is vibration and intent, and that's kind of it, really. So if you engage negatively in occult practice, which of course practitioners of occult magic do, they actually, summon demonic entities into a room and try and bind them and that kind of thing, using their magical names and things. As soon as you go down that path, you're creating a lot of negativity for yourself, which obviously we realised that wasn't the way, the method we wanted. We wanted to adopt like a medical and scientific method that we could teach normal psychic people and people that were quite confident to be able to do, that didn't involve any type of kind of spiritual warfare, for want of a better word.
Right. No. Yeah. I without going too much, I mean, there's many periods of my life where I've seen these creatures, I've seen lord demons attached to them and other negative, and these black masses that they tend to travel in. I used to get angry when I was younger, this and that. And then I got to a point where I just stopped getting angry. And I'll never forget, one night I wake up and there's these different creatures around my bed, different types of demonic entities. And at first you would think a normal person would probably be screaming bloody murder, be terrified. But when you've experienced this for a long period of time, you're like, oh God, not now. And I said to him, I said, what do you want? I go, why are you doing this? I said, do you want me to start praying and call the angels and do this and that? I'm not going to yell at you. I'm tired. I got to go to bed. I think if you guys would just be more positive, your whole existence would be so much better. I said, you know what? I don't have time for this. I love you. I love you. I love you. And I love you. And I love you. Good night. And as I started to lay down, I looked with the corner of my eye and they all kind of shrugged and just like floated away, like they just went away. And it was because they wanted me to be upset, to be afraid. They wanted me to be angry. They wanted me to engage in that way. And because I didn't, it's like they just lost interest. I was like blown away.
Yeah. And obviously you got there quite quickly. I spent quite a few years not coming up with that concept. Yeah. So I would find 3 a.m, the bedroom would go freezing cold and we'd have entities in the bedroom, especially from clients that we just cleared the same day. And, I'd have things on the bed, leaving footprints and impressions in the bed. And I'd have, things, I'd wake up with things around my neck, trying to strangle me. Wow. And the whole kind of like
physical... Did you get scratches, like 3 scratches too?
Did you ever get those? Yeah. and like triangles on my arms and things and bruises.
Wow.
And, you know, I wake up and Jane would say, you know, what have you done to your arm again? I'd see like a big bruise.
Oh my God.
And I mean, it got to be so normal. We just laughed about it because when it's your life to start with, it's kind of crazy. But everything becomes normal in the end.
Yeah, but Andrew, here's the thing. You know, I've had my ups and downs in dealing with this, and I don't strategically focus on the type of work you do, but I have had cases throughout my life and continue to, similar to what we're talking about here, and I may share one or two of them. But how do you maintain that? I mean, because they cause anxiety, they cause depression, and they also cause you to get easily distracted, get bad habits, whatever it is, to avoid you completing and fulfilling on a daily basis the things you're supposed to do.
And that is a perfect description, actually, of kind of my daily life to a certain degree, really. So every day I find there's this kind of, not intrusion, there's like obstructions in the way for things that I'm trying to do. So
obstruction, yes.
So if I sit down and I've got 5 or 6 clients to do first thing in the morning, I'll sit down, I'll start to connect to chair and start to work, and then the doorbell will go and the postman will be there. So I'll go down and do that, come back up, reconnect, sync again, start again, and then the dog will start barking downstairs. So I'll go, and it's like, I mean, I just laugh about it. I just laugh to myself and just think, you know, I know what's happening. It is obviously this level of obstruction that is in your life, and then, you know, my children will ring or there'll be a problem, and it's just like, I kind of realised really, if they can't get to me, which they can't very easily now, they just get to everybody else in your family that you love around you.
Oh my God, Andrew, we're going to become best friends here because we had so much in common. I mean, if you had to, you know, you're sleeping at night and then you hear this scream or yell or a voice, it'll wake you up, or you hear a bang in the room, and it'll happen like 3 times through the night. And and every time you get into a deep sleep, it'll happen, so you don't get a proper night's sleep.
Yeah, and I can totally, you know, when I was first doing this type of thing, I wasn't as experienced as I am now, being through that. But I got to the point that I couldn't sleep at night, and you know, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd come to look at the clock and think, I need to use the toilet, and it'd be 2:59, and I'd think, oh no, I can't get up now because it's going to be 3 o'clock again. And I would open the bedroom door, and there'd be something stood there that would like attack me, or you know, just. It became a joke because I used to wake Jane up, my wife, and say, it's 2:59, I need a wee. And she'd go, oh, not again. So then we'd go out together, basically, because I always thought that something crazy was going to happen to me, like I'd get pushed downstairs or something. So we used to kind of go out together as like a joint party, which, I mean, it's funny now, but at the time it was very frightening, really.
Jeez, Andrew, when I was a kid, because we had ghosts in the house, okay, and I had an imaginary friend when I was 3 years old. It wasn't imaginary, it was a boy ghost. And he came into my life, I think, to teach me a few things, but also he saved me from something that almost happened. But later on, when we moved into the other house in the late 70s, you know, my mom got this brilliant idea to get a Ouija board because all these ghosts were going on in the house. I played with the Ouija board, my mom and I did all the time, my neighborhood friends, whatever. We opened up doorways and portals, and these creatures, these gargoyle, oh my God, just the temperature just dropped behind me while I'm talking to you. I mean, we're talking ice cold.
Oh my God, okay. The freezer doors opened. That was my...
They know when you're talking about them.
Yeah.
That's what I hate. Anyway, you know, they started coming into the house, you know, these black masses and doing stuff and, you know, nightmares and the scratches and coming out of the walls, chasing the sitters, chasing myself, terrorizing my sister. So, you know, didn't know what these things were, you know, thought it was the devil involved and all. It was terrifying, you know, and eventually got rid of it. But that was my first encounter through all those years dealing with these things that people don't realize you can open up certain doorways and bring them in. But for yourself is, I wanted to say, during that period of time, whenever I had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and if it was 3, 4, or even 5 in the morning, I was too afraid to go in that hallway because I always felt their presence watching me. And because they come out of the darkness, I was afraid they were going to lunge at me, pull me in, you know, like you said, push you down the stairs. So, Andrew, I used to wet my bed. Yeah. I used to either go in the bed or lean over and go down the vent for the air conditioning, right? And my mom used to get so upset. She sent me to doctors and other people. We had this this thing I had to lay on, and that if I started to pee on it, it would shock you. I mean, there was all this stuff I went through. This was a huge problem. Right. It became a behavioral problem because I was so terrified to go down that hallway in the middle of the night and be attacked. So I mean, I'm relating to what you said, and I've never said this publicly, and I really don't care. I have to share this because you brought it out of me, but I understand that fear.
I think until you've actually experienced that level of fear, you wouldn't really understand it. So when we talk about it, obviously you've been through similar experiences to me, and therefore you can associate with it. But I think if someone hasn't had what I would call like demonic fear, which is what these entities seem to just bring up in you, even if you're not afraid. So, I'd be working on a client with Terry, and we'd be talking, and then we'd connect to something. I realised there was something demonic connected. And then all the hairs on the back of my neck would come up, and then suddenly my heart would start beating out of my chest, and the room vibration goes right down. It would get so cold, and you think, I mean, it seems that if you're in their presence, that's the normal human effect, which initially you can't really control it until you get your head back in your, get yourself kind of calm, and it's like, no, this, as you said, just. So I used to see these pictures of like horrendous things they do to people. And then, I started to change the picture to a mouse. So every time they showed me this picture, which would create fear in me, I would then change the picture to a mouse. And this would sort of flip-flop for a couple of minutes.
Wow.
Until eventually they, what we were dealing with, realised, that you had your way of playing their game effectively. And then they would just start to laugh and say, okay, we're going to go. And that was that. And then literally I'd just see them leave. And then obviously Terry would document what the session that we'd had, and he would then connect to the client normally a day or two later, just to give them some time to see if they noticed. But normally the next day they'd phone him up and say, I feel differently, I've woken up positive, the voices have gone. Wow. Or the negative intrusive voices have gone, I just feel really different. But of course, obviously their etheric field generally had been kind of sabotaged to a certain degree, because normally people that are in that state have addictive problems as well, and therefore they're taking alcohol, etc. So from an etheric field perspective, their etheric field I used to kind of see it perforated. So when I looked at a client, I would see like a field around them, a bit like their aura really, and I'd just see big holes all over the place, which was kind of like intrusive, holes that negative things can see and connect through.
Like portals and stuff?
Yeah, basically. And then as soon as someone becomes healthy, I'd see those things just, the etheric will just fold up around itself, and you'd be back to like a fully protective state. And that was when we realised basically that, through your lifestyle and your thought process and meditation and good food and things, you can basically fix that broken etheric field pretty quickly. And of course, as soon as you do that, then, you're back in your protected state, and negative spiritual things have more difficulty attaching to you.
Well, I find that extremely interesting then. So if we focus on our lifestyle, a proper lifestyle, of course, positive mental attitude, in our thought process, focusing on good things, being positive, and as well as creating and projecting good things. But then also working on meditation to balance the mind, body, and soul, and concentrate on, your feelings and emotions, keeping them in check, as well as good food. So all of that, from what you're saying in retrospect, can fix the etheric field quickly. I find that really interesting. I always thought that, once it's been contaminated or penetrated by some of these negative forces, it takes a long time, or it could last a lifetime. But that makes sense. When you look at the brain as neuroplastic, our etheric field would probably heal itself much quicker as long as we do those things, raising our vibration frequency. I'm glad you brought that up. Now, there's something I do want to share with you too, because this is the type of work that you do. When I was in college, I took psychology, and I was hoping to learn about a lot of this stuff. In abnormal psychology, we studied schizophrenia, hallucinations, manic depression, bipolar, stuff like that. And they talked about a couple cases. One of them, this guy is watching TV, all of a sudden gets up, goes in the garage, gets the shotgun, kills his entire family, sits back down in the chair, watches TV, the police show up, and he has no memory of any of it happening, and he's devastated. And so they say, well, that's like schizophrenia, and I'm like, so I raise my hand, and I'm like, have they done any studies to see if there's any ghosts or spirits that are actually affecting these people? And the teacher just looks at me like I'm an idiot and tells everybody to turn to a different chapter and continues with the class. I was completely ignored.
Yeah.
So I was actually really bothered by that, because in college I was getting these voices telling me to do really bad things, You know, I remember sitting down in front of my counselor. She goes, what are they telling you now? I said, they're telling me to punch you and choke you. She goes, do you want to do that? I said, no, it's wrong. I can't get them out of my head. She goes, what do you think they are? I said, I just think they're the ghosts and spirits from my house or something else doing it. But sometimes it just doesn't stop. And I have listened to them sometimes. I punched some kid in high school because the voice told me to, because he was talking to a girl I liked. He says, well, just go up and punch him. I go, no, I get it. Just go and punch him. So I did. And I felt so bad after, like, what the hell? You know, he called a monster. And I'm like, why did I do that? You know? And there's other things too in my life. I listened to it and did stupid things. And then I actually realized, well, I got to stop listening to this thing. This isn't me. And eventually it subsided, but still with the type of work I do, and I know some of my colleagues out there, we've discussed this, these voices come back and they try to tell you to do stuff. Here's an interesting attachment story, and then I'd like to hear from you regarding how you've confronted these things and if they've ever told you anything important. I remember I was at a nightclub, this was years ago, this had to be like 2002 or 3, and I'd been drinking, and I wanted to go into this bar next door. And I had to go in there because my buddy had my keys, and the bouncer wouldn't let me in. So I'm like, I want to go home. I got like a 45-minute drive. I want to come in. And he wouldn't let me in. He says, no, you got to wait 15 minutes till we close. All of a sudden, I got so angry that a voice was telling me, attack him, you know? So I took a couple steps towards him, and then my rational self was like, what are you doing? I stopped, and I felt this entity come out of me and lunge at him. And as I see this ethereal thing in between us, then pass through him because it doesn't have the physical body to do it, he looks at me, I look at him, and I said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I leaned back against the wall going, my life force is low because I had been drinking, so I'm not in control of my body. It found an entry point in there because I started to get angry and it latched onto that. I said, I can't drink anymore. I can't do that. Otherwise, I'm going to be susceptible to this happening again. And then it was a realization with many other experiences, and even in other people where I've seen them come out if they've been on drugs or drinking or other situations, these things have spoken through them directly. So when you deal with clients like this, what are some of the things that you've run into, and have these entities talked back to you, had conversations with you?
Yeah, so that was what I used to do. So when I started to do this with Chen, so I started off doing Reiki, basically. So I wasn't spiritual at all. So I wasn't like you, quite psychic from birth. I was the opposite, really. It was only kind of in my 30s that everything, I got divorced, basically, and everything kicked off at that point. So that was my kind of start from the spiritual path. So I was that guy that was just interested in football, basically, and stuff. And people that talked about aliens and ETs and stuff, I just thought they were all completely bonkers, and they need to get a proper life. That was my kind of place that I was, which of course it was quite funny because I then became that person, really, that all of the friends that I had sort of disappeared pretty quickly when I started talking about, hey guys, there's this negative stuff happening, and what do you think about aliens and ETs, and I've been reading this and that about spirits, and everyone just thought I'd lost it, basically, and kind of, when I used to phone up and say, when do we next meet? It was no thanks, we're busy.
Right.
So I kind of lost everyone literally over probably a few weeks. I had quite a big friendship group, and they just disappeared to nothing, really, which was a bit of a shock, terrible, to be fair. But it was good for me because obviously, when you look back at these experiences, you think it was just the right thing to happen to push me. It made my appetite for the spiritual world just kind of increased because of those sorts of things, and I just followed that path. So after doing Reiki, I then started to do hands-on healing. And Jane and I had a small house with like a little kind of shed in the backyard, basically. And I put like a couch in there and, lit some candles, that kind of thing. And then, had like friends and family coming, really. And I just put my hands on. And I kind of realised pretty quickly this odd thing happened. As soon as I put my hands on somebody, on their stomach, so I wasn't kind of walking around the bed or anything, just on their stomach, I'd started to drift off, almost as though I'd gone to sleep. And then an hour would go by, and then I'd kind of come back, and then they'd talk about feeling things moving inside them. And of course, to start with, it was a bit of a joke, really, because I just assumed it was funny, really. And then when I kind of finished my last Reiki course, the practitioner said to me, look, I've got this guide here that's coming in called Chen, and he's saying that you're going to work with him doing psychic surgery. So, you need to familiarise yourself with him. And I didn't hear him at all. I just I took on board what she said, but I didn't really think about it too much. And then the next time I put my hands on, I had this voice come in and said, "Oh, I'm Chen, and I'm taking over." And I was like, "Yeah, well, before we kind of agreed to that, I'm not that comfortable with you just taking over, basically." So I started to go and do like meditation classes and things, and then found a group in Westbury with a good friend of mine who we were doing like trance mediumship, and kind of over the course of about 6 to 9 months, I got to the point of actually allowing Chen to come in properly and take over, and he would stand up and walk around the room in my body. And then obviously I'd come back. So I was in the shed one day, just getting back to the story really, working on this lady who had schizophrenia. And it was the first one that I'd done. And the next thing you know, she kind of leapt off the bed, because I had my hands on her stomach, and grabbed my throat and was just basically throttling me. And of course I was looking into the house. I could see Jane making lunch, and I'm screaming in my head, like help, but obviously nothing was coming out of my throat at all, really. And then obviously Chen basically took over and then started to talk to this demonic entity in some other language through me. So I was actually talking in some old English type language, and Chen was saying, "I haven't seen you for a long time." And they were having like this bizarre conversation, because obviously this entity knew of his energy and he knew who this was, and they were just talking. And Chen said, "You can let go now, because obviously, you've made your point." And the next thing, this lady just let go of me, her hands dropped down and her eyes opened, and obviously this entity left. And she just got up off the bed, and from that day onwards had no voices, no intrusive voices, anything. And I was quite shaken up, to the point that I walked in with a big bruise all around my throat and said to Jane, "I think I need a run," because I won't believe what's just happened to me in the shed. And of course she thought I was joking until this big bruise came out. So that was my first introduction to negative entities or demonic entities that can actually possess a human body and do things through them physically. Whereas up to that point, I've been communicating with negative things telepathically, but not anything physical in that same way. And that was when I realised, of course, that, when, as you just talked about earlier, when people say that, they've shot their family, or they've killed people, and the voice has told them to do it, or has taken over, I kind of totally understand that. And that was my appetite for this work came in with Terry, because we were talking about going into prisons, actually, and working with prisoners, because we were pretty sure that when they committed their crimes, they were possessed effectively by another entity, and therefore they didn't really commit the crime themselves, if you kind of go with that concept. So we wanted to see if we could kind of have that conversation with them.
See, that's what I find fascinating. But like, a lot of people are out there say, well, anybody can say the devil made me do it. And, it's not going to hold up in a court of law. So the question is, are these negative entities causing people to do it? But it seems like in your research, you've discovered some of those things. And I find that fascinating. I have to agree with you on that, just from things that I've seen and the way some people have acted. Is they go and commit certain crimes or act a certain way because something's either jumped into them or told them to do it. But then, of course, that comes into play what happens to the free will. So let me just give an example of certain crimes, some smaller crimes, but here's something. I remember a couple years ago, I had saw a couple viral videos. They call it the knockout game, where certain gang members or people in the city, it was happening a lot in Chicago, on the West Coast and the East Coast, New York, is kids would be walking on the street and they see an old man or a person or a woman, doesn't matter, and they go right up and just knock them out, punch them and knock them out. And they laugh about it, And they're like, there's some type of dare or whatever was going on. It was happening all over the place. And it's just horrible, because some old man died from it. He hit his head and was bleeding. People were sent to the hospital, fractures, everything. I mean, you just don't go up to an elderly person or to anyone and just hit them. And just for fun, like, I go, there's no way a human being would just do that. So I'm driving in my car thinking about it. I'm really angry, and I'm kind of cursing, the devil. I said, I know you're doing this. I said, I know you and your legion are jumping into people, telling them to do this, because no good human being would ever do something like this. All of a sudden, there's an oncoming car. The car swerves and comes straight for me. And I'm like, oh my God, he's not going to stop, and starts speeding up. So I turn to get out of the way, and he turns also, as if knowing that I was turning to come head on. At the last second, I go into the ditch, and this thing just misses hitting my side mirror on my car. Now I'm angry, and I'm like, what an asshole. And I'm about to turn around and go after him to figure out what the heck they're doing. They could have killed me. All of a sudden, I feel this calmness come over my body and says, Chris, it is over. It is past. And I go, what? And I look, and I don't even see the car put on its brakes. It just goes back onto the street and just keeps going, right? And then I realize, oh my God, a negative entity had swept into this driver, did this as an attack, and then jumped back up. We tend to sometimes call this a jumper or a walk-in. It walked into this person for a brief moment and walked right back out. This not only confirmed what I was just thinking and saying out loud in my car, it did this to another car, like, how dare you, you're not invulnerable, you're not, whatever, we can come after you too. And I remember calling up Adam Bly, telling him about this, and I was like, oh my God, they can just jump in that quickly into somebody and do that. Have you dealt with, well, obviously you guys deal with attachments, but have you had where you're working on somebody and something just walks right in, starts talking to you, and then just jumps right back out?
Yeah, so that was kind of a normal day for Terry and I, really, to be honest.
Okay.
So we would, if we were doing the work with the clients in the way that I talked about earlier, where I was connecting to whatever energies were with them and having those conversations, that was the one aspect. Of course, the other aspect was the physical in-person thing with people. And that's what would happen. They'd present as being normal and okay, and we start talking to them. And then normally Terry would probably find some sort of catalyst or some sort of trigger. And next thing, their face would change and contort, and their eyes would go black. And literally they'd start speaking and spitting, and you'd be dealing with some type of entity. And then it would either just leave, or we would obviously move it on effectively. But generally, the people that happens to don't remember anything. They don't remember that happened at all. And a lot of the ones that we dealt with had big timeline gaps as well, whereby things would jump into them and jump out. Or they'd say that quite a few of the people had been through quite a lot of sexual abuse when they were younger. Mm-hmm. And certainly by satanic groups, that type of thing. So we found that we started to get quite a lot of those types of clients because, of course, they've got portals in them. And when there's a portal in somebody, then obviously entities can come and go as they will and as they need to, effectively. So that seems to be a pretty big problem for most people that have those sort of mental health problems, really.
Oh my God. So what you're saying, Andrew, is, people that can have these certain mental health problems, for example, someone borderline personality disorder. I dated somebody that I even had them move in with me. I thought I could help them, change them, that type of stuff. So they probably had the portals in them, which explains how these things got in my house, because I gave her permission to be there, and they got into my house through her. And that was probably the most evil I've ever seen in my life compared to, obviously, what I went through as a child. These things came back. They were attached to her. And I remember confronting her because she saw one of these things race across the room too, these little gargoyles. And I remember we got in an argument. She used to start arguments all the time and disrupt whatever I was doing, work-wise or family-wise. It was always trying to cause problems with my friends and everybody else. Nobody wanted to be around her anymore.
Yeah, well.
But we got in this argument, and I turned to her and I said, it's probably these imps, they're probably affecting you. And she goes, they're not real. I go, what do you mean not real? You saw one. You called me freaking out, locked yourself in the bathroom, told me to come home, and you were terrified because you saw one. She turns around angry, like a completely different expression on her face. She says, Chris, we don't exist. We don't exist. And then all of a sudden she turns around, and I'm like, what'd you just say? And I know what she said. I said, you said we. She goes, no, I didn't. I said, they. I said, no, you didn't. Caught you. You're in her. And a voice says, Chris, they've always been attached to her. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, what do I do? What do I do? I mean, why? How? I mean, okay, she had issues, things happened to her when she was younger.
Yeah.
Okay. So someone can have sexual abuse. Someone can have addictions, trauma, stuff like that. Why is it that these things gravitate to those types of people and then latch on to that, these traumas or addictions that these people have?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris, actually. And something Terry and I pondered a lot, really, because we found that most people that had the most negative experiences and problems had been normally through some type of sexual trauma when they were younger, or they'd been affiliated to some type of like satanic cult, those sorts of things, really. And I think what we came up with, the concept that it was all vibration, basically. So those sorts of people that have been through those terrible experiences, their vibration would be really low, and they would be very angry because of the things that happened to them. And therefore, the heart center had almost closed. There was no loving aspect to their kind of etheric field or their personality at all. And therefore, and that's what you tend to see in their normal life. You'd see that they create chaos in their life, and the people around them find that they're chaotic and you can't deal with them very well. And everything is just negative. And like you say, I think it's how they are controlled. So these people that it happens to when they're young, these entities or gargoyle type things, or however you see them. And of course, they're called different things in different cultures, aren't they? Because religion talks about jinn, and it talks about negative entities and demonic spirit, that kind of thing. So I think every religion's got a different wording for the same thing. But basically, I think when a youngster goes through some type of traumatic experience, these things see that happen and attach. Because you actually said earlier, and I did laugh to myself actually, because you said they're around all the time. And that's how I see things. I used to look at the window at night, and I could see them on different houses around, just looking at me and laughing. Because I could see them telepathically or psychically, and they would just sit and laugh, and they'd sit at the window. And I'd walk past the window at night again at 3 a.m, and I'd jump back because there'd be something just sat there, just watching you basically. And I kind of realised, in fact, it did affect me for quite a while, that I thought, I'm never going to be free from this. They're watching me all the time. And as soon as you make a mistake, or like you say, you've had a drink, or as soon as you slip, they're there basically to come straight in and cause you some type of problem, or so it takes a bit to get your head around it.
You're going to make me break down, because I know they beat you, and then they find other people to get at you, or they try to affect other people. I mean, I've had my stepdad, who was an Air Force pilot and everything, didn't really believe in a lot of this stuff. He used to say, I swear I see these black masses fly by. My mom's seen them. I saw them. She was out in the garage smoking, and I come in there, and we're just talking, and then she goes, Chris, I go, what? She starts shaking, going into this seizure, like this tremors. I'm like, Mom, what's wrong? And then I see this black mass shoot out from underneath her chair and shoot through the garage door, go back into the house. Real quickly, I said, oh my God. And I knew they were trying to affect her. And she's had attachments. She's turned and said stuff that is horrific, and then has no memory of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done prayers with her, everything. We've tried. We've done the chimes. When I did the chimes, she starts screaming, it hurts, it hurts, it hurts. And we tried to do the Our Father and the prayer, and she starts goofing off. She goes, I love you. You're such a sweet son. And I'm just like, Mom, come on, be serious. This was a couple years ago, but it's like, you get to a point where, like, my God, it's attacked my friends, girlfriends, any girl I've dated. I had a girl got possessed once. I wake up and she's leaning back and forth, and she's like, Chris, it's your house. I'm like, oh God, here we go again. So I go into my little refrigerator in the laundry room, which is right next to my bedroom. I get a bottle of water. I take it out. Of course, it's ice cold, right? I open it up, like this is like 3, 4 in the morning, and I just start saying a quick prayer. Okay, Holy Lord Jesus, I ask you to bless this water and all the angels and saints. And then I pour it on her, and she screams, because not only is it ice cold, but it shoots out of her. And I said, is it gone? She's like, yeah, but why did you do that? I said, is it gone? She said, yes. All right, get back in bed. It's like, and I don't mean to be that cold, but when you've dealt with this so many times, I mean, how do you maintain your sanity, Andrew?
If I was being truthful, I'd say it's probably been a struggle, really. So there was a time that things were happening all of the time. I wasn't sleeping. I just wasn't getting sleep. Had a time in the bedroom. I went to bed one night, and I always used to see shadows at the bottom of the door and that kind of thing. So I knew there were things around, really. And then I started having like pretty horrendous dreams and things. And then one night in the middle of the summer in the UK, it was actually hot for a change, which never normally is, of course. And I woke up and I just sweat pouring off me, and the radiators were on. The heating system was actually on, even though it was programmed to be off. And I got up and I couldn't work out what was going on. I walked downstairs and could see that the actual timer, the whole heating thing was off, but all the radiators were red hot, basically. The room was red hot and the bedrooms were red hot. And I went back to bed, and then I could feel things getting into bed, like touching me in places that you're not really keen to be touched in the middle of the night and that kind of thing. I just thought, I'm just going to go mad. And you can't talk to anybody. that was the biggest problem for me. I had no one to talk to, really.
Yeah.
And I thought at one point, I said to Jane, I'm going to get a sleeping bag and just going to go and sleep in a church, because this is becoming sort of. They did get me to the point that it was sort of touch and go for a while, really, because I guess I was electing whether I wanted to stay. And I remember driving around. I drove down some lanes one night. I just went round some bends fast with my eyes closed and just thought, let's just see if I come out the other side, basically, which I obviously did. But, I think I did get to that precipice point, really, that because when it's happening to you all the time and you can't get away from it, it seems you look at all these other people having a normal life and going to the football and going to the cinema. They're chatting with their friends, and you're thinking, no one can believe what's going on in my life. And sometimes you wonder if it's you and not things happening to you. But obviously, I kind of realised that wasn't the case.
Well, I can tell you, Andrew, and I know some of my other colleagues will be telling you right now, it's not you. We've experienced this. We know about this. I mean, I just want you to know, from listening to you and looking at your background, the work you're doing is extraordinary. It's helping many people. Because, when we look at psychology today, and what's interesting, though, a couple of years ago, a lot of psychologists, engineers, even scientists were going to the demonology courses in Rome. And Rome talked about this because they realized that there's other stuff going on. I have worked with some psychologists that knew nothing about this and then have come to me and said, hey, we do know something's going on. We just don't really talk about it. Even the DSM manual, diagnostic manual for psychological disorders, which was, manual number 5, if I'm correct, talked about dissociative identity disorder, that, multiple personality, that the person can have an entity, God, demon, or spirit that can attach to them. It was in the manual.
Wow, yeah.
And then there was psychologists that struggled to try to get that in there, and then other psychologists came out and then they removed it. And then they kind of dumbed it down, taking out some of that verbiage, because I think it caused some controversy. But that's wrong. And here's the thing, and you've dealt with losing friends. You've dealt with skepticism from people, and people say, oh, you're a fraud or this and that, because none of this stuff exists. And it's hard to deal with that. I just had something happen recently because we had a shooter here in Chicago in July, and obviously the guy has mental issues, okay? Had threatened his whole family before with guns, but then he took a AR shotgun machine gun and he went and shot a whole bunch of people, okay, and killed a whole bunch of people on 4th of July. It's only like 45 minutes from my house. So I was like, oh my God, what drove this guy to do this? Because I've been working on research with serial killers and other individuals that they all talk about hearing voices. And the question is, these voices, what are these voices? Well, I've done some experiments with individuals that have these voices, and we've captured the voices on recording, validating that what they're hearing is actually occurring. And using various technology, we've been able to, have them talk to this entity that, the voices that they're hearing in their head, and we get responses.
Right.
And they're telling us what the responses are, and here we are recording that voice. So, and we know, and if people understand QEEG, everybody's brain has a different frequency. There's over 1,000 different brain frequencies, combination brain frequencies, and they narrowed it down to, it used to be 100, now it's 30, to put people into categories. So that means that we can have 100 people, 200 people in a room, and everybody's hearing a different frequency. And if we broadcast just that frequency, only one person in that room is going to hear it. Yeah. Does that make the person crazy? No, because we're broadcasting that frequency. These entities, what we're finding out in our research is that they are broadcasting to the specific frequency of that person. Now, there could be another person in the room that has the same frequency, and then they're both hearing it. We've had that happen where 2 people hear something, but the rest of the people don't hear it.
Right.
And that can easily be explained with broadcast and reception of the brain. And QEEG's patterns and other types of technologies can brain map, and they can put people into those categories that are similar. And then if you focus on that frequency, you'll see those people hear the frequencies, but the other people in other categories don't. So when people say, oh, that the voices are just an imagination or a disorder, then how do you explain that we're recording the voices that they're hearing, and I can play it back for you, and then you hear it? So that's a thing that fascinates me, that I think psychology needs to start looking into, because this is the work you're doing, but there are scientific ways to record this, document, and validate it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Chris, actually, because that's where sort of Terry and I were with our research, really. So you've kind of taken it that next level, because he actually went to the UK sort of board of psychiatrists, and there's a retired psychiatrist that kind of headed that up called Dr. Alan Sanderson, and he was a good friend of Terry's, basically, and he basically said, there obviously lots of conversations, but basically said, psychiatry knows what's going on. It just can't talk about it because there are gatekeepers in place. And most psychiatrists would tell Terry at conferences behind the scenes, your work's really interesting. You're on the money. We know this is what's happening, but we can't talk about it. Otherwise, we'd lose our license, basically. So there is this kind of gatekeeping structure, which doesn't really need to be there because, of course, I guess psychiatrists looking at using medication to help people, and that works for some people.
Yeah, but that suppresses it.
Of course, yeah.
And it still traps the spirit attached. The spirit's still attached to the person.
Because you've still got the same problem. We haven't dealt with the source of the problem, which is the attachment,
right?
Of course, which is the whole thing, really.
And when you talk about the attachment, I mean, I found some people that I deal with, for example, there's a case I had, and I was just with some of these individuals a couple weeks ago. This was about 5-6 years ago. This girl was cutting. She was cutting herself, a teenager. So I sat down with her, and she wouldn't open up to me. So I psychically started seeing imagery. I tell her about the imagery from her childhood, and she just, oh my God, she breaks down crying. She goes, "How did you know that?" And I said, "Because I'm trying to heal you. This is what they're attaching to, this memory, this experience you went through. Until you confront this and forgive and this and that, they will continue to latch onto you." Now, she knew nothing and didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that. And I made her realize, change her perception, that these voices in your head are not you telling you to do that you have to listen to. This is the enemy. These are these negative entities doing this because they're picking on this emotion, this memory, to attach themselves to. First, you have to confront this emotion, this past, and you have to forgive it and heal from it. Second, you have to realize that any of these voices coming back, you said, you don't have permission to enter into me or to tell me to do this. I'm not going to hurt myself for your pleasure. And then you realize that you're not doing that to get rid of the memories. They're making you do that to maintain the pain, the terror, and keep it going and keep those memories going. And all of a sudden, she confronts this. She ends up talking, going to counseling, confronting this person from the past. She hasn't cut herself since.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. I think,
and you have similar cases like this, right?
Yeah, I've probably worked on like 2,000 clients myself, and Terry and I did work. So we've probably, between us, done sort of 3,000 people, basically. And I mean, everything is emotional, isn't it? We're human beings, we've got emotional, and things happen to us that are emotional. So I think that is what you've just talked about is the actual key, is tapping into the emotional place that's holding the trauma, which is what the entity is connecting into. And as soon as you can let that go, then basically your vibration starts to rise, and they're easier to push away. Because that's one of the other things. Quite often we would clear someone, and for 2 or 3 days they'd feel better, more positive. They'd wake up happy. Some of them would email Terry or speak to me and say, "I can still hear a voice, but it's really quiet now in the distance." And our opinion is we've disconnected that from you, but that entity is still out in ether, and it's still trying to talk to you and get to you. So you just need to basically not associate with it. Don't give it any of your kind of focus or intent at all, and it will just basically disappear because it will go off and try and find somebody else. Because
right.
So again, my opinion is, or Chen's opinion really, everything is supposed to be where it's supposed to be. So we farm animals like cows for their milk. So we put cows in the field, they eat grass, therefore they make milk, which we then also take from them, and then we make products out of the milk. So Chen's explanation to me is, our energy is the same. So these entities need to kind of survive. They need to ingest negative energy from us, our emotional state, etc., because it's vibration. And Chen's explained to me that, a lot of this energy is actually traded on a kind of intergalactic market, effectively. So human negative energy is very powerful, and it's quite a sacred commodity in the ether, out in the universe, effectively. So these entities that can connect to somebody and extract and kind of live on your negative energy or your level of fear or anxiety, we're just kind of food for them, really, the same as that cows are kind of food for us.
Right.
If that makes sense.
So what type of entities have you run into, or things have you run into besides just like these gargoyle type, impish type things?
So they're the ones we normally see most of, and then obviously there are like demonic entities that are much more intelligent that seem to date back a long way, and they know a lot about human history, and their opinion is that they were here on the planet before we were ever created. I've had that conversation like hundreds of times, basically. And
do they ever say anything about the fallen, that they were part of the fallen?
Yeah,
like the fallen angels or the offspring, stuff like that.
They do kind of make references to themselves as being part of the hierarchical lineage, basically, and then they talk about the kind of ancient alien concept that that they came from beings that weren't Earth-based, effectively. And then we've dealt with quite a lot of lizard-type entities. Again, they talk about the fact that they own the planet effectively, and we're kind of here taking over their kind of top level of the planet, but again, they live in caves or they live underground primarily, is their opinion. And I've had them, what I perceive as seeing them in the room, and they smell quite bad. So sometimes, again, normally 3 a.m, we've been working with a client, and next thing something manifests in the room, and I can see it, and I start to get the heart beating and the sweat and all that stuff, and then there's this horrendous smell, and I think, okay, this is some type of lizard-like entity basically sort of manifesting. But for me, the things that I've found the most difficult to deal with is the kind of like the proper ET things, like the proper negative ETs. So that was kind of like the 3 levels of grading that
like the draconians, the reptilians, and
so things like the shape-shifting type entities that just keep changing, and one minute they look like a sort of arachnoid spider, and then that changes to something else. But they seem to be very dominant and loud telepathically in your sort of mind.
Almost like parasitic, because Robert Monroe, who created the Gateway, and he did many sessions, he talked about these parasitic type of vampiric insect type entities that would are in between our dimension and other dimensions. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, they're the ones that I don't fear them the most, but they seem to be the most negative, and Chen's not that keen. So and that was an experience for me as well, because of course I rely on Chen as he's my guide, and he's the guy in spirit with the team that's going to kind of back me, really. So I'm kind of the PA that does the face-to-face on in body, and then there's this team behind Chen that we both rely on basically to do other things, and that team that he has other types of ET type entities on a positive vibration.
Are they like some type of council or something?
Yeah, that type of thing. I mean, he talks about, so we were dealing with one of these arachnoid things that we're talking about that seemed to be quite powerful. And Chen said to me, I need to push this up. We can't deal with this level of negativity sort of thing and power. So he was actually calling in, whatever's above them effectively to come and help from a positive perspective. And I hadn't ever experienced that before. And I sort of laughed and said, Chen, I thought you were sort of placed to deal with everything. And he said, no, we can't deal with everything. We can deal with most things, but we can't deal with everything. And that was that parasitic arachnoid type entity that
Did Chen ever say like where he came from? I mean, what lives he had, or was he ever incarnate on this planet or anything like that?
Yes, I mean, in those conversations, he lived in China basically, and I've got like a picture up. Was on the website actually, just a Chinese guy with a sort of bun and the typical sort of Chinese hairpiece. But I mean, he was last incarnate back in the sort of, I think he was like 1200s or something. But he talks about, he only lived to like 30 odd years old and had a little family and things, but he doesn't really go into what he really is. So I've got to the grips of the fact that, a lot of the things he can do, he hasn't been quite clear with me on, because of course it's not normal things. So I kind of know that, obviously from a past life type thing, he's obviously been something more than just, a guy that lived in China with a family and that kind of thing.
Yeah, many lives, many masters, yeah.
Yeah, but he hasn't actually shared with me what or who he really is. But it's pretty obvious, obviously, it's quite predominantly powerful because of the work we're doing and obviously the experiences that we've had together.
Have you seen, like, during your work, have you seen any angels or anything like that, other type of enlightened beings?
Yeah, so once we had a possession case. Again, that was when I was doing the physical sort of hands-on thing, and again, it was some negative entity. Chen was talking to it, and it wasn't actually going to leave at all, and he was trying to negotiate with it to leave. Basically, this person, it was a young child actually, and in the end, he just said, Chen just basically said, I'm fed up with the conversation. And the next thing, the whole room just went bright white, and there was just a being stood behind him, effectively, where the client was sat, and this thing was just gone in seconds. So it was gone in a flash again. And I laughed. And I said to Chen, "Was that an archangel?" And he just laughed. He didn't answer, but it was pretty obvious that he pulled something in that was very positively high in vibration.
That's awesome.
Which is, again, for me, it was quite a good affirmation, because quite a lot of the conversations I had with Chen over the last 20 odd years has been, look, I'm kind of putting my life really on the line to do this type of thing. As you said, that you get targeted all of the time, and and I listen to things now which I never used to do. So if I'm going somewhere in the car and I'm running late and I think, I need to get a cup of coffee, or I need to use the toilet, whereas before I wouldn't do that. I think I'm going to be late. Whereas now I think, no, I've had the thought that I'm going to do that, because that 2 seconds will put me in a different place. So potentially, if something's been lined up, to take you out effectively, and I do think about that quite a lot, to be honest, because I've seen it with quite a few guys I've been working with that have sort of passed, and obviously the Terry experience wasn't great either, really, because he had COVID. So he did a conference in London, and I was supposed to go to that and do some in-person work on the Sunday. So he did the Saturday and the Sunday. And then my mum wasn't very well, so I went to see her in a different part of the UK. So I said to Terry, look, I can't come physically to London, but I can do it over Zoom. So we agreed that if he needed me to do that from the medium perspective, we would hook up. And I rang him and he said, no, it's okay, we're not going to need you to do stuff, it's fine. So 2 or 3 days later, most of the people went down with the bad form of COVID. So there were probably 10 or 15 people in this workshop, but 4 or 5 of them had COVID and were ill in bed, unable to walk, in pain. And then Terry phoned me and said, look, he's a stoic guy, like a really stoic guy. And he was in tears and said, look, I'm in so much pain. Can you get Chen and his team to help? And so I said to Chen, what can you do? And he said, well, it's a viral thing, blah, blah, blah. Probably work through it. So a few days later, he'd obviously went to hospital and they kept him in. And I spoke to him 2 or 3 times over a couple of weeks that he was in there, and he was then getting better. So we had a laugh about it. I said, Terry, you've had enough holiday now and been enough rest. It's time to get back to work. And he laughed about it and said, yep, I'm getting better, and that was the last time I spoke to him, basically. And then 3 days later, on New Year's Eve, it turned out the hospital had been giving him remdesivir, I think, which is the medication that basically kills people.
Oh, no.
And, he passed away. So, and he was actually trying to get a video out to some of us because he was concerned that what was going on wasn't quite right in that hospital. And then the next thing was obviously he passed. So, for me, there was
that's horrible.
Definitely a bit of conjecture as to what actually happened there, really. But whether either that or whether he was so delusional that he was actually sort of, close to passing and thought that's what was happening to him. But it seemed odd that, a few days before he seemed pretty, with things and intellectually okay. And then the next thing, obviously passed. And like you said, you're aware the negative side is, it's got your cards marked all of the time, really. So it's just making sure you don't put yourself in too much danger.
Oh, they're always watching, and I know when I've done any of these TV shows, when I was doing Help My House is Haunted, I told Barry Guy, I said, Barry, listen to me. These things are going to come after us. We're going to run into them. They're going to expose themselves at certain places we go to. Most investigators are not aware of these things. And there's a lot of skepticism, but there's a lot of investigators, paranormal investigators I know out there that have experienced and seen these things too. The good news is that we've got their voices on recording multiple times. I've got a clear recording audio of them saying, what is their fear? Because they're trying to find our fear. Because I would tell the crew, no fear. We don't get scared. We don't do this. We're here to help this woman because of what she's dealing with. If you show any fear, it causes weakness and allows them to distract us. And when any crew member was feeling anxious, I remember the director's pacing back and forth. I said, Ben, are you okay? He says, yeah. I said, no, you're not. Are you really angry like you want to lash out? He's like, yeah. I go, step outside. So he stepped outside. I said, remember, don't let them do this. It's not you, it's them. Okay? So we would have situations like that where they would try to do that stuff. And what's really weird is right now, I'm just completely losing my train of thought of where I'm at.
Yeah, of course, that's how it works, isn't it?
Oh my God.
If you kind of extrapolate that out into the world, that's what's going on a kind of worldwide theatre stage every day. So these wars and the news is always broadcasting everything negative, which is kind of being run by some type of negativity. So it's again, I think more and more people are starting to realise this is actually what's happening. Is that we are being kind of intrusively channeled and moved around like pawns on a kind of chessboard, really. But obviously,
and Andrew, look what's going on in the world. Look what's going on in the world now, especially in the United States and other countries, with people being attacked on the streets, cars being some robberies, people being shot and killed. Everything's going crazy, and you have politicians screaming, yelling, and pulling out the worst in each other, and talking about the worst in each other, and just all this negativity, this chaos. And some people are just getting used to it and becoming a part of it. Plus, people that have these issues that have been pretty quiet about are all jumping on board and acting the same way. And it's like these armies are growing of this negative entities. These armies are growing of these things affecting people. I mean, are you seeing this in increasing cases?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, definitely increasing cases. And to be honest, Chen did highlight this to me quite some time ago. So probably about 4 or 5 years ago, we were having a conversation in a workshop that Terry and I was doing with a whole lot of people, and Chen basically said, you guys are going to need to teach these principles because things are going to start to get difficult because there are more legions coming. There are portals being opened by the CERN Collider and things, basically knowingly opening portals into other dimensions and attracting more negativity in. And Chen said, look, one person or one team can't deal with this. It needs to be, because it is not that difficult to do if you're of the right mindset. So Chen said, you need to start teaching this work. And that was where Terry then, he went off on his kind of globe trot, went over to the States and Michigan, and he met up with some monks there, and he went to Argentina to Buenos Aires and did like a big workshop teaching people there. So we started to basically create groups of sort of 15, 20 people that can actually understand the techniques and start to learn and teach other people, so we can extrapolate it out, because Chen knew 5 years ago this is what is coming, so it's been there on the timeline, if you like. And I think it will probably
Are you still doing these workshops?
Yes, I mean, most of it stopped, with obviously the departure of Terry. So there's a couple of other guys in the UK that I've hooked up with. And in fact, Jono messaged me tonight actually just to say, right, let's get a date booked and we're going to sort of restart again. So
I would be interested, depending upon what my travel situation is, everything is taking one of these workshops, because regardless of my experiences, any techniques and things I've learned, and I've learned a little bit from Adam Bly, he's Catholic, but I've learned on my own. But listening to you, there's obviously a procedure, there's techniques that I would love to learn. And I think this is fascinating, because I know the importance of what you're doing, is what I'm trying to say. And a lot of my listeners understand this. And I know there's other people out there think, oh, it's all crazy. Like people are just mentally messed up. They're going to kill people. They're going to do things, whatever they want to do. But those types of people have never been confronted by these in-betweens, by these entities that are doing this. They've never had an attachment. They've never seen it for themselves. They don't realize it. And they don't have the research showing this. This is real. A lot of my listeners know this is real. We need more people out there that are taking this seriously and doing something about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Chris. Actually, we definitely hook up afterwards, and we'll get something put in place for sure. But I think that's my point, really. Chen always says to me, we've just got to hold the line, basically. So it's just keeping yourself out of that negative vibration, mentally keeping yourself strong, and just holding the line is the way that he talks about it. So again, I sort of run meditation courses from the website, and again, we work through, obviously clearing yourself, and that's part of the kind of like meditation courses. Then I move into clearing yourself, making sure you're clear. You can clear your family, then you can clear people around you. You can obviously clear your property, your cars, that sort of thing. So as you start to clear things around you, everything starts to change. And that's one of the things that I never thought, actually, when I started to do these courses, I didn't actually realise it was going to impact people in their own life. I kind of assumed that I'd teach techniques for them, and they would then go off and do these things. But as soon as I run a course, it's like a whole lot of emails the next morning saying, I woke up, I feel different, I can't believe I've been so down and so negative. Or because again, the first part of the first course is basically teaching clearing yourself, and just about everyone's got something attached, which they then learn how to detach and obviously observe they've got something attached. And then the next morning they wake up and say, wow, I can't believe I'm like 50 years old and I've never felt so good.
Right. Is this what you do as a psychic surgeon? I mean, just cleansings and clearings and the spirit release? Is there other things that you do as a psychic surgeon?
Yeah, so I used to do the physical. So I used to work on people with physical ailments and things, but I preferred this. I found this more difficult, to be honest. So rather than just put my hands on somebody, letting Chen come in and work on them physically, which we worked on people with all sorts of ailments, which was okay. I found this type of thing more challenging, and it was more. I had more of an appetite to do this type of thing, and I saw working against negativity as my core task really for this lifetime. And Jane and I had like some pretty big difficult conversations when we were first together, because she was not keen at all, because as you know, as soon as you start to do this work, you get targeted basically. And I think if you keep going through it and push through it, then you become protected and you become confident, and then you don't really get touched. But, quite a lot of the people that do the courses mail me and say, I've lost my job, I've lost this, money problems now. Everything seems to go wrong in their life pretty quickly.
Right.
And, of course, that is that's the hold the negative stuff has on people. But if you can push past that through it, then you can obviously attract and manifest a much more positive life. It's just whether you can get to that.
I need to work on that, because I have so much negative stuff happen. And I said, all right, fine, that's going to be my life. And I think that's the problem, is I just accept it. And so we'll have to talk about that. So how can people get a hold of you?
Yes, I work off the website, basically. So the website is andy-porter.co.uk. So obviously all the info's on there, and there's a whole lot of YouTube videos. And then obviously Terence is really good at, he's got a PhD, and he's kind of, Dr. Terence Palmer, so he's very good at the whole research thing. So I was obviously working a full-time job and trying to do this, on the side at nights and weekends and family and that kind of thing. So I didn't have a huge amount of time. So Terence started to document everything with videos. So he's got a YouTube channel basically with a lot of the cases that we did on, when we had like succumbus come in, and I was talking to a succumbus about what they do and why they do it and things. And
a succubus?
Succubus, yeah. So we had a conversation with one of those that went on.
Tell us that story, can you?
So that was just with a person, basically one of the clients. We got talking to it, and then obviously had this conversation with succubus, and it was just explaining how, again, they're just doing what they're kind of programmed to do. So, a dog is a dog and it barks, and a succubus energetically just wants to connect to a male, basically, and then obviously through some type of sexual act take their life, because they were sort of explaining that, when a human takes its life or its life ends, there's a huge adrenaline explosion, effectively, and that's the energy they want to kind of capture, and that's what they can then trade on this kind of universal energetic market. Wow. And that's why so many entities want people to take their own lives, because if they're attached to you and you take your life at that last moment, obviously your blood's coursing with fear and adrenaline and all those sorts of things. So you can imagine there's this massive energetic explosion that they can then harness and capture, which is what they use. And of course, it will be a fear-based thing as well, which is where they are with it, really. So I can send you a link to Terence's YouTube channel.
Yeah, I did not know that, what you just said. Wow.
Yes.
That is fascinating. That makes sense.
I mean, that is the whole thing, isn't it? Everything becomes simplified to a certain degree, really, when you kind of realise, everything's just doing, we've got a genetic program that we run, effectively, and so as a dog and a cat. And these entities are the same. They just do what they're programmed to do. It's just that for them, we're their food source, because we're emotional.
I understand that.
And obviously, they can make us create a lot of negativity and fear. So it's all about creation.
Have you had a lot of clients that will do drawings of some of these entities, that are aware of these entities, of that they see them like black masses or creatures or anything? Have you had people draw sometimes what they feel is attached to them?
Yeah, most of them draw the traditional like grey alien, I think, because that's the thought in their mind.
Oh, wow.
So quite often, Terry would send me a picture and say, this is what they think's attached, and they would have the little picture of a grey, basically, which I think because that's in the media, it's kind of permeated most people's mindset. When we connect to it, we wouldn't see that very often. We would more likely see these gargoyle type things or some type of ET energy generally. So again,
Yeah.
reptilians were quite predominant, really. And
it's interesting how these gargoyles will sometimes pretend to be children or other people, and they'll tend to be something that you wouldn't recognize. They like to be hidden in most cases.
Yeah, and of course I think that's their strength, isn't it? Their strength is to basically obscure themselves, really, and to kind of masquerade as something else. So I mean, the first thing I do when I connect to some client and hear a voice, which is an entity, I ask it 3 times higher from the highest light, which they generally fail. And I would know immediately then. So, of course, the client would say, oh, but this is my guide and it's Jesus or it's, some deity. And you think, well, it's probably not, is it really? You can't all have like Jesus Christ connected to you, talking to you.
Right.
And when I did talk to clients, when we did the in-person work, I would say, what would you say the basis of the conversation is? And it's always about control and negativity. So immediately it's not a positive entity or spirit because you wouldn't have that conversation. And then, again, we would teach them to say, ask that entity 3 times, is it from the highest light? Generally on the 3rd question, you get a no, so it's something negative. And then
that's a good point.
Because then, of course, I would talk to something.
That's a good test. It's a great test.
Yeah, I do it every day. So every morning in the shower, I have a shower, I do my cleansing, and I connect to Chen. And, 28 days out of 30, are you from the highest light? Yes. Are you from the highest light? Yes. Are you from the highest light? Yes. Happy days. Just carry on. And then occasionally I just get this yes, no, I think. And it will catch me when I'm tired, generally. And I'll think, because I'm so used to it being yes, I have to question myself and think, was that a no? So I then clear myself and start again and say, right, I'm connecting to Chen. Are you from the highest light? And it will go yes, yes, no. And you think, oh, something's just, again, as we said, they're waiting all the time, basically, just to sort of nip you.
I got to try that. I don't do that. I'm going to try that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the sort of easiest tests that we've come up with, really. So there's a sovereignty test. The other thing we do, and we'll sort of teach in the courses, is, the sovereignty test. Okay. So again, go through a meditation, and then you effectively connect to your higher self and say, am I sovereign, yes or no? Am I sovereign, yes or no? Am I sovereign, yes or no? And again, you get a yes, yes. But you should get a yes, yes, yes immediately. So if you get anything other than 3 immediate yeses, you know that, again, with sovereignty, which is meaning only you, so your energy should just be yours. So if that sovereignty test fails, you know that you've got an attachment because something else is attached to your energy that's not you, and therefore you can't pass that sovereignty test. So again, that's it's another really quick way of doing it because, as I say, I do this every morning in the shower. I'm a sovereign, yes or no. And as soon as I've done the sovereignty check and put myself in like a bubble of light, then I connect to Chen for a chat. And again, 9 times out of 10, I know it's him. And occasionally something will try and masquerade as him, but it doesn't feel and sound right. And then I'll think, no, let's go back and do it again. And then realise that something else has nipped it. Normally when you're tired or, you're just not quite consciously with it.
Right.
But I mean, those 2 things are really good. So if you give those a try and see how you get on with it. But
okay. I know I've gotten real lazy and sometimes just get right into it without like protecting myself and doing whatever. I said, I'll worry about it later. Right. And, but no, I need to do that. That's good advice. I mean, how do you protect like your family and, and friends and stuff?
So I do the same really. So, in a week, sort of 2 or 3 times a week, as I'm going to bed, I'll just basically visualize, a group of people, which effectively is the family unit. And then I'll question the family unit. Is the family sovereign, yes or no? So do 3 tests on the family group. Generally get a no straight away, so I know that somebody has been compromised. And then I just work through basically clearing that group, because everything's intent, effectively, isn't it? So you can't kind of get it wrong. And then I'll just connect to Chen and say, can you just clear, whoever. So I used to go through each person. So, my son's called Ollie and say, is Ollie sovereign, yes or no? Is Ollie sovereign, yes or no? And it takes too long to go through everybody in that way. So then I realised I could just do it as a group and just ask if the group's sovereign. And if they're not, just clear everyone in one go. So, but I mean, things still go wrong. They still creep through, or the kids will ring me in the morning and say, I've just had a horrendous dream at night, and you won't believe what's happened. Oh, wow. And I obviously laugh because it's become so normal for us as a family that we just laugh about it.
Yeah, the same with my family. Yeah. My mom's like, oh, guess what I saw today? What'd you see? Oh, another ghost or something shoot down the hallway.
Yeah, or say to me, there was something in my car. Okay, right, so we'll clear, we just clear everything collectively. So, but I mean, to be honest, I tend to cheat now, really, because I kind of back it off to Chen and his team. So I just say, can you do it, guys? Because, I've obviously got the here and now things to do, and I can't be consistently watching my back. But for quite a long time,
Right.
probably like 15 years ago, I did feel like I was not that well protected, and I was quite vulnerable really to what was going on. And I think I needed to go through that experience to make me appreciate, what we're talking about.
Absolutely, because then you have that empathy for your clients.
Yeah, oh, definitely, yeah. And I know I was that person. I reached out to lots of people when thing jumped on my bed, and I came to, and I wondered if I was dreaming. I looked on the bed and I could see 4 footprints, and they were huge. And this thing was over the top of me, grabbing me by the throat, and I felt like a rag doll, and I couldn't see anything physically, and I couldn't believe what was happening. So when you've had that happen, and other people write to me and say, "You'll never believe it, but this is happening," of course I just laugh and say, "Well, I do understand. I've been there, and therefore, I make sure I give them the time that I wanted to find myself when I was in that situation." That's the thing, isn't it? We all need to club together, don't we, and join together?
Yeah. Share our findings and our research. I mean, the problem is, there's just some people out there that don't believe this, and they feel it's strictly a mental disorder because they don't believe in this other realm or it's possible. And I just think we're going down a really dangerous path if we maintain that type of mentality, because then people will never get cured. They'll never get healed. It'll never get resolved. But then, whether you believe in, various cultures or religions or not, I mean, I was raised Catholic, and when I look at scripture, I mean, Jesus used to remove demons, negative entities from people that were suffering from physical ailments and even mental ailments, and he would remove them and they'd be perfectly fine.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're doing now, basically. It's just that,
right.
We're sort of seen to be on the fringe of society because obviously the media's played its part, and it's, or if you like, the adversary really is, as that's what they said, they're hiding in the darkness type thing, and that's that's where we are, isn't it, really?
Andrew, I give you some advice because the work you're doing is extraordinary, and I'm going to keep in touch with you. I know I'm going out to Ireland next month, but I'm not going to be in the UK, but I may be going. I'm going to try to get a trip into UK because there's some people I want to see regarding like stuff we're talking about and everything. But the advice I want to give you is please continue to do what you're doing and move forward, because it is going to be needed more. But also talk to your circle of people in this and see who they know and trust that is in ITC research, instrumental transcommunication, such as EVP, radio boxes, and stuff like that. Find someone reputable that you can work with and collect the data. When you have clients and getting their permission for it to be recorded, documented, these ITC experts will document it, and they will, in most cases, be able to validate the voices that this person's hearing. Okay? And there's technology to do that. Now, most ITC researchers don't do this type of thing. It's something that I've just gotten involved with, the last couple of years, but now I know it's legit. And it just to make a case in point, we're going to have to end here because I got a client in 7 minutes, is I went 3 years ago to a Navy SEAL's house. He fought in Afghanistan, Somalia. He was complaining of voices, and he believed that there was negative entities after him. I walk in the house. I felt 2 entities, and I explained where they came from. He confirmed exactly what I had said, those areas, one in a forest, one in a cave with these bodies. They opened up a chest, and he had this jinn that attached to him. I said, what is this? Oh, cold air again. I said, what is this entity saying? He says, the entity keeps telling me to go to war. And I said, okay, the entity that's attached to him, what do you keep telling him? I play it back, and it says, go to war.
Right.
He just shakes his head and goes, because he's used to it. My buddy's like, oh my God. His girlfriend and her daughter grab their mouth and they curse like, holy shit. And they're like, how come we can't hear it? I said, because it knows his brain frequency. But ITC, in many cases, is able to capture these voices. So now you put a personality and an audio recording to that voice, which allows the person to realize, oh my God, it's not me. And he says, thank you so much, because now I know it's not just in my head. These are things putting it in my head. Thought transference. So I would say, as you continue your research with you and your colleagues, start working with ITC experts to catalog and document this scientifically. This can then be taken to the journals and psychologists saying, well, here's the proof.
Yeah, brilliant. That's fantastic, actually, Chris. I hadn't realised actually technology had kind of come that far, because obviously Terry and I, we obviously weren't working that way. But I mean, that is amazing, isn't it?
It is. And, we could talk for hours just about this particular topic, and maybe we will in the future. But I've got a client in like 5 minutes. So I want to thank you so much, Andrew. You're doing incredible work. I'm going to continue to follow you, and I want to be in touch, because I want to take one of these courses or workshops to improve with what I'm doing, because what you're doing right now and what Dr. Terrence did and what you guys both did together, I've been following that, and it's extraordinary. And I believe this is the next form, the much needed form of parapsychology or psychology, or healing, whatever it's going to be called, that needs to be done.
Perfect. That's great, Chris. We'll definitely catch up afterwards, like you say. Well, yeah. And like I say, if you're over here, swing by. There's always a bed here if you fancy a night of conversation.
I would love to meet you and see you work. And for everybody listening, I'm going to put his link on the Planet Paranormal website and in some of the posts so that you can follow and check out his website. And if you're dealing with or suffering from something, you can reach out to him and schedule an appointment. But for everybody listening, and to my guest, Andrew Porter, thank you very much for being on today's episode.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
You've been listening to Chris Fleming and Andrew Porter on this edition of Spirit Talk. We'll see you next time.